Between the ages of 22 and 24, I lived in a small, pleasant suburban neighborhood. I had a steady job and probably paid more than I should have for my house, but it was a simple, unremarkable area. Nothing too fancy or affluent. Overall, I had no major complaints about living there, at least until one unsettling encounter completely tainted my perception of the place. Even now, I doubt I'll ever fully shake off how disturbing it was. I've always been a night owl. Staying up late is second nature to me, and I often ventured out for long walks after dark, relishing the tranquility of the sleeping suburb. There was something comforting about the solitude, the streets empty and the night wrapped around me like a quiet blanket. On one such night, I took my dog Finn along on one of these peaceful walks. Finn was a small dachshund mix, weighing only about 10 pounds. He was unusually quiet for his breed, shy and gentle by nature, rarely barking unless he really needed to. It was cold that night and Finn and I wandered through the empty streets for over an hour. The neighborhood had a peculiar layout. The houses were spaced far apart with wide, grassy fields separating them. These vacant gaps were completely dark after sunset since the light from the houses didn't stretch all the way across. It made the streets feel even quieter, more secluded. I usually appreciated how calm it felt. That night, though, things took a different turn. Somewhere along our walk, I stopped in my tracks. Through the soft rustle of the wind, I heard something faint, just enough to catch my attention. Standing still with Finn beside me, I tuned my ears to focus. After a moment, I heard it again, faint laughter. It sounded like it could be coming from across the street, from one of those dark, empty fields between neighboring houses. It was soft and eerie, not loud or boisterous, more like someone trying to stay quiet, almost as if they didn't want to be heard but couldn't help themselves. It was hard to tell if it belonged to a woman or a child. I peered into the shadows where the sound seemed to be coming from, but there was nothing, just pitch-black darkness. The longer I stared into the void, the more uneasy I felt. After about 10 seconds of searching for any sign of movement and finding none, an unsettling chill settled over me. I nudged Finn, who stood silently next to me, and we continued walking as quickly as we could without breaking into a run. As we walked away, I tried to rationalize the experience. Maybe it was just a child playing outside late for some reason, giggling at something I couldn't see or understand. It didn't make much sense, but it was the most logical explanation I could muster at the time. Still, unease lingered as an unwelcome companion on the rest of our walk. About 20 minutes later, our route brought us back to that same street on our way home. As we passed by the now familiar dark gap between houses, the place where I'd heard that unsettling laughter earlier, I didn't hear anything this time. The silence was reassuring in one way but unsettling in another. It somehow made the earlier experience feel even stranger. For the rest of our walk home, I dismissed it as some random occurrence and didn't dwell on it too much. When we finally got back to the house, it was late, well past midnight. Too tired to bother turning on the lights or going through my usual nighttime routine, I headed straight upstairs with Finn in tow. After a quick shower, I collapsed into bed while Finn burrowed under the comforter like he always did. Exhaustion weighed on me, but oddly enough, I couldn't settle down right away. Even though my mind wasn't preoccupied with anything specific, something felt off. I found myself tossing and turning, repeatedly opening my eyes as though something was compelling me to stay alert. Time blurred in a haze of drowsiness and paranoia until eventually I fell asleep, though I couldn't remember exactly when. Hours later, I woke up in the darkness of my bedroom. Disoriented but slowly regaining clarity, I instinctively reached down to feel for Finn under the covers. My hand met only an empty bedspread where he should have been. Sitting up in confusion, I scanned the room and finally spotted him by the bedroom door. He was sitting upright with his head slightly tilted and his ears perked up. Something had caught his attention. He didn't bark or whimper. He just stared intently at the closed door with an unwavering focus that made my skin crawl. "Finn? You okay, buddy?" I whispered softly into the shadows. He glanced back at me for just a moment before turning his gaze back to the door and sitting down closer to my bedside. This time I walked over to the stairs and descended quietly, each step creaking under my weight. Reaching the front door, I pressed my face to the peephole and scanned the porch. It was empty. She wasn't there. Despite that, I kept staring outside for a solid 30 seconds, sure that I had heard something, heard her. Then I heard it again. A laugh, louder this time and disturbingly clear. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my house. A cold wave of dread rolled over me as I spun around. The house was still cloaked in darkness, the only light bleeding in faintly from the windows. But through the black void of the living room, I caught sight of her, or at least the outline of her. A woman was sitting on my couch, completely still, staring directly at me. My heart thundered in my chest as her lips widened into a grin, and then, another chilling laugh spilled out, soft but menacing. I froze. My thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. To this day, I can't fully explain what went through my head in those few seconds, or how I managed not to collapse under the sheer terror flooding my body. Instinct kicked in and I bolted. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I rushed to my bedroom, scooped up Finn, my small dog, and shoved myself into the back of my closet. Trembling, I fumbled for my phone and called the police, barely able to keep my voice steady as I whispered what was happening. I prayed that she would stay downstairs, that I wouldn't hear her footsteps behind me as I cowered in the darkness. The silence that followed was unbearable. From inside the closet, I couldn't hear a single noise, and somehow that made it worse. My mind churned with horrifying possibilities. Was she creeping up the stairs? Standing right outside my door? Or maybe she was still sitting on the couch, smiling into the dark as if she were waiting for something. 5 agonizing minutes passed before the blue and red flashes of police lights invaded my window. When they arrived, they found her, not in my house but strolling down the sidewalk of my quiet neighborhood. Her appearance was impossible to ignore. Around 40 years old, barefoot, wearing nothing but a thin nightgown despite the freezing 3 a.m. air. The officers told me she wasn't armed but had a history of violence. She didn't live nearby either. Her family was baffled when they found out where she'd been spotted since they lived 40 miles away and hadn't seen or heard from her in 2 weeks. They said she had issues. Her family even suggested she might have been sleepwalking, mumbling that she probably wasn't even conscious of breaking into my house or following me home. I wasn't so sure. You see, the way she got inside, breaking the back window, should have woken me up. Yet it hadn't. That means she must have entered earlier while I was still out on my nightly walk, a routine I rarely ever broke. She could have been watching me for who knows how long beforehand, mapped out my habits, then waited for her chance to make her move. The most bone-chilling realization? She was likely already inside when I returned home that night, hidden in some shadowy corner as I obliviously went straight upstairs to bed. The next few days felt surreal. Though they removed her from public circulation temporarily, something in me just couldn't settle down after that ordeal. The mental image of her sitting silently on the couch, smiling at me with that blank yet unrelenting grin, was like an iron brand seared into my mind's eye. It haunted me at odd hours, especially at night when sleep evaded me most acutely. Even now, 5 years after that horrifying event, there are nights I wake up disoriented and drenched in sweat, scanning every dark corner to make sure no one is lurking. It didn't take long after what happened for me to decide I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I had to leave. Selling it and moving away didn't erase the memory though. Panic still sneaks up on me whenever I hear faint laughter at strange times or see an open door where there shouldn't be one. The police later told me she was released after some time under supervision. Since then there've been no incidents, nothing reported about her in local news reports either, but I'll admit I track her name online every so often just to make sure. A part of me feels like it's only a matter of time before something happens again. What makes it worse is that all this started on such an ordinary night. I had worked late at home in my little office and decided to call it an early night since it's difficult to put into words the sheer terror of waking up to find your bedroom door wide open when you live alone. For as long as I could remember, I'd made it a point to always close and lock the door before going to bed each night. So seeing it open like that sent a chill straight through me. Sure, there was always the slim chance I'd somehow forgotten or hadn't latched it properly, but in the moment, all I could think about was how wrong it felt. I slowly got up from bed, my heart thundering in my chest as I moved toward the door. I left the lights off, not wanting to draw attention to myself in case the unthinkable happened and someone really was there. Gently, I nudged the door open just a little wider and peered into the hallway. Holding my breath, I stayed rooted there, absolutely still, straining to hear or see anything out of place. But everything was quiet. After a long minute, I managed to summon enough courage to venture out and check the rest of the house, going room by room with painstaking care. Nothing. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Back in my bedroom, I spent some time fiddling with the door, testing it to see if it could have opened on its own. But there was nothing wrong with it that I could find. The whole situation gnawed at me. There didn't seem to be any rational explanation. In the end, I had no choice but to assume I'd just been careless and try to put it behind me. I climbed back into bed and though sleep didn't come easily, I eventually dozed off. Strangely enough, by morning, the incident felt less significant as I busied myself with the usual routine of coffee and work. Nothing seemed out of place all day and for a while that comforted me. By 10 p.m. I was back in bed after spending the evening watching TV. When I woke up again in the middle of the night, a little past 2 a.m., my heart sank as my eyes darted toward the door. It was open. This time, there was no room for doubt. I knew for certain I'd closed and locked that door before going to bed. My stomach twisted into knots as I sat up in bed. Just as I had the previous night, I crept through the house, checking every corner for any sign of a break-in or disturbance. Still nothing, just that damn door. I started to rack my brain for explanations, but none of them seemed plausible. An unlocked door swinging open on its own might make sense once or twice. But night after night? And if someone had broken in, surely they'd have taken something by now, not just left me unnerved with an open door. What made things worse was that this baffling scenario kept repeating itself over the next 3 weeks. Not every night, but often enough to leave me anxious and sleep-deprived. On the nights when it did happen, and there were 3 or 4 every week, I'd wake up in a panic to find my bedroom door wide open again. I even called the non-emergency police line at one point, desperate for answers. They sent someone to check out my place, but they didn't find anything unusual and didn't seem particularly invested in solving whatever was causing it. Eventually, after weeks of paranoia and restless nights, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a budget-friendly security camera online, something cheap but functional that I could plug in and aim directly at my bedroom door from my nightstand. If whatever was happening kept up for much longer, I'd have no choice but to leave this house behind altogether. After setting up the camera one evening, I double-checked that it was positioned just right. Once satisfied, I locked the door, turned out the lights, and climbed into bed with one simple plan. If something happened again during the night, I'd have it on tape. At 1:46 a.m., I woke up abruptly. Groggy at first, my heart skipped a beat as my eyes adjusted to see that same damn door, open yet again. This time was different. This time I had proof waiting right next to me. I quickly grabbed the camera's SD card and slipped out of the bedroom. Instead of wandering through the house in search of answers like before, I went straight to my laptop in my home office and plugged in the card. As soon as the video popped up on the screen, I skimmed through it in chunks, rewinding first by 2 hours, then an hour more, then 30 minutes. Each time the door remained closed. It wasn't until 1:44 a.m., just 2 minutes before I'd woken up, that something finally happened. In chilling silence, I watched as the door made an eerie clicking sound all on its own. The man remained in the room for about 40 seconds, silently staring at me before retreating just as quietly. Not even half a minute later, I woke up, and the footage abruptly ended with me removing the video card. That's when it hit me. This had all occurred mere moments ago, which meant that whoever he was could very well still be inside my house. Panic coursed through me as I sprinted back to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. I locked the door again, fully aware that it wouldn't do much against someone who had managed to get inside in the first place. I sat there motionless, every sound and shadow in the house magnified in my mind. Thankfully, nothing happened while I waited for the police to arrive. They conducted a thorough search of my home but found no trace of the intruder. Without that footage, I doubt they would have believed a word of my story. 4 weeks afterward, I stayed at a hotel while investigators combed through my house, looking for fingerprints, DNA, anything that could serve as a lead. But there was nothing. Not a single clue. Whoever this man was, he had done his work with an unsettling level of precision. It became clear that this wasn't someone who had made a random mistake. This was a person who knew exactly what he was doing. The theory was that he might have been entering my house for several nights, picking the locks with terrifying expertise, carefully avoiding touching anything that could leave behind evidence. The grainy, dark video showed little besides his vague silhouette. There was no clear view of his face, no details to work with, no indication of any kind of motive. It was unnerving because it left every possibility open, and every possibility terrifying. The investigators suggested that he might have been just another creepy guy, with no discernible purpose, which made the situation all the more chilling. People like that don't need reasons, they just act. It was a haunting thought, the kind you can't shake easily. Sleep didn't come easily after that night. The idea that these encounters often escalate over time loomed heavy in my mind. Whether I would have woken up one night to find him still there or whether he would have decided to do something far worse, it's hard to believe things would have remained at this disturbing yet non-violent level forever. Although harmless hardly feels like the right word to describe the invasion and fear I experienced, I am grateful that I wasn't physically harmed. I'm only able to write this now because I've taken drastic measures. I packed up my entire life and moved across the country. After weeks of living out of suitcases and looking over my shoulder, I finally settled into a new place recently. If there's any silver lining to my experience, it's this. If something feels wrong, If strange things start happening, listen to your instincts and take action immediately. I don't want to imagine what might have happened had I ignored the signs. The incident haunts me still, and not just at home but on the road too. In early October, I went on a road trip to visit some friends. The drive there was fine. Excitement kept me going with little effort. But the return trip was a different story entirely, long, dragging, and utterly draining. As night fell, I grew increasingly tired but pushed through in hopes of getting home sooner. At around 1 a.m., I glanced at my GPS and groaned in frustration. Somehow, I had missed an exit several miles back. Whether due to fatigue or highway hypnosis, I wasn't sure, but the mistake was costly. The next opportunity to turn around wasn't for another 15 miles, meaning I'd added another half hour or more to an already grueling drive. It was clear that continuing on wasn't safe, so when I spotted a small rest stop by the side of the highway, I pulled in with a sigh of relief. The lot was eerily deserted, a stark contrast to my earlier stop-and-go traffic along crowded highways, but exhaustion overpowered any misgivings about the isolation. I reclined my seat as far as it would go and draped my hoodie over my head to block out light from the nearby street lamp. Unsettled about being so exposed in my car without window covers, I figured sleep might at least come quickly. For about 10 minutes, I lay there in a half-doze when an unexpected sound sent a bolt of fear through me, a muffled cough coming from somewhere outside my car. My body tensed up as I shot upright and scanned my surroundings through every window pane. Not a soul in sight, not in the lot nor along either direction of the highway, yet I knew what I'd heard wasn't imagined. Someone was definitely nearby. I sat tense in silence for what felt like an eternity before reluctantly attempting to lie back down. I wasn't entirely confident in what I had heard earlier, but actually seeing someone in the building made it all feel much more real, and much stranger. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, probably close to 30 minutes, just staring at the rest stop. Whoever was inside never came out, nor did they reappear at the windows. As time passed with nothing happening, my initial panic began to fade. And though I'd been so sure of what I'd seen and heard before, doubt started creeping in. It's going to sound ridiculous in hindsight, but I found myself questioning whether I'd imagined it all. I kept running through the possibilities. Who could possibly be inside that building, sitting there for hours without a car and without even once showing themselves? The whole thing seemed absurd. Granted, my thinking wasn't exactly sharp after being up for more than 24 hours without sleep. That's the excuse I'll stick with. Eventually, I decided I simply didn't have all the answers. Assuming there was someone in the rest stop, I reasoned they were unlikely to pose any real threat to me. Feeling slightly more at ease, though still wary, I leaned back in my seat, keeping the building within view, and allowed my body's exhaustion to take over. My eyelids grew heavy and before long I drifted off. When I woke up, it didn't feel like much time had passed, maybe 20 minutes at most. At first, everything seemed fine. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. But then as I turned my head, I froze. Standing right outside my window was a man. His face was so close to the glass it might as well have been pressed against it. He was staring directly at me with hollow, tired eyes that sent a chill down my spine. I'm honestly impressed with myself for how quickly I reacted. Almost instinctively, I turned on the engine and prepared to get out of there. But as soon as I began to drive away, I felt a sickening jolt and heard the unmistakable hiss of air escaping my tires. My stomach dropped. He'd sabotaged my car while I was sleeping. When I glanced back at him through the window, he was already running toward me, clearly anticipating that this would happen. At that moment, panic surged through me. My options seemed terrifyingly limited. Either exit the vehicle and risk confronting him or stay inside and surrender control of the situation, maybe even my life. Adrenaline coursing through me, I made my decision. I slammed open the car door and launched myself at him before he could gain the upper hand. He didn't expect it at all. We struggled for a moment, but I managed to overpower him fairly quickly. In my frenzied state, I hit him hard enough to keep him subdued while I scrambled back to my car for my phone and called the police. Then I held him there for what felt like forever, probably around 25 minutes, until a highway officer finally arrived. Once the officer was on the scene, things got even more unsettling. The man lost what little composure he had left. He thrashed around wildly, screaming incoherently and horrifyingly, confessing outright to everything. He even said some deeply disturbing things about what he had planned to do if his attack had gone according to plan. Whether or not his words were entirely truthful is something I'd rather not dwell on too much, but judging by everything that had happened, it was clear his intentions were far more sinister than simply stealing my car. The realization that he had likely been watching me that entire time, waiting for me to fall asleep so he could make his move, is beyond unnerving to think about. Out in the middle of an isolated highway with no one else around to hear or see anything, who knows how things might have ended if I hadn't woken up when I did. I'm incredibly lucky that it all worked out the way it did. When I think about it now, it's horrifying to realize how close I came to being another victim of whatever this guy had planned. At least he's off the streets now, and hopefully not in a position to harm anyone else again.